All right, I think we're ready. I think everybody's here. The lights are on, the cameras are rolling, all that good stuff. Hi, I'm James Crossley. I'm the general manager of Madison Books. Thank you so much for joining us for our live virtual event tonight with Jonathan Meiburg for his book, A Most Remarkable Creature. Thanks also to my partners at Country Bookshelf in Bozeman, Montana, and Paulina Springs Books in Sisters, Oregon, for making this and all our other events possible. We are recording this evening. The conversation will be viewable later on our Books in Common NW YouTube channel. If you have any questions for our authors this evening, please use the Q&A button down there at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those as time allows at the end of the program. You can also leave comments at any time using the chat function on the screen there. If you run into any tech issues along the way, we recommend leaving and re-entering the room via the Zoom link. That usually resolves anything. The use of headphones usually resolves any audio difficulties that people are having. We would like to remind you that this is a shared creative space that we want to remain safe for everyone. And so if we ask that you be respectful of everyone here, any offensive comments, we'll see the commenters removed from the space. While this is a virtual space, I am speaking to you tonight from Seattle, Washington, which is the ancestral home of the Duwamish people. In fact, a city named after one of the Duwamish people. The Duwamish are still present and still seeking federal recognition as a tribe. You can learn more about that effort at realrentduwamish.org. See if we can drop that URL into the chat here in a little bit. I would also like to acknowledge that Migizi Pensano's poem, A Template for Your First Ever Native American Land Acknowledgement, is brilliant. And that's another link that maybe I'll see if I can drop in the chat later. We can read when we're done. So to introduce you to our guests this evening, Jim Robbins is with us. He has written for the New York Times for more than 35 years, also for numerous magazines, including Audubon, Condé Nast Traveler, the Smithsonian, Scientific American, Vanity Fair, the Sunday Times, and Conservation, covering environmental and science stories across the United States and around the globe. He's the author of, among other books, The Man Who Planted Trees, A Story of Lost Groves, and The Wonder of Birds, What They Tell Us About Ourselves, the World, and a Better Future. He lives in Helena, Montana. Also with us is Jonathan Meiburg, who received in 1997 a Thomas J. Watson Fellowship to travel to remote communities around the world, a year-long journey that sparked his enduring fascination with islands, birds, and the deep history of the living world. Since then, he's written reviews, features, and interviews for print and online publications, including The Believer, The Talk House, and The Appendix, on subjects ranging from a hidden exhibit hall at the American Museum of Natural History to the last long-form interview with author Peter Matheson. But he's best known as the leader of the band Shearwater, whose albums and performances have often been praised by NPR, the New York Times, The Guardian, and Pitchfork. He lives in Central Texas, although we understand that he is migrating, as some birds do, to another state. Maybe you'll hear about that later. Jonathan's book, A Most Remarkable Creature, The Hidden Life and Epic Journey of the World's Smartest Birds of Prey, was published just 8 days ago. So recently that I'm only halfway through it myself, but let me tell you, I'm savoring it. I sat down saying to myself, all right, let's find out what the big deal is with these birds. And from the opening line, which is, if I got this right, it's the turning of the earth that spins the winds around Antarctica. I knew I'd come to the right place. I was like, oh, this is about birds and a whole lot more. So I'm really enjoying it, and I know you will too. Without further ado, I will step away and let these two gentlemen talk, and I'll pop back later on to share your questions from the audience. So please share those in the chat. I'll see you a little later. Take it away, guys.
Well, good evening, Jonathan.
Hello, Jim.
Talking to you, however, remotely. I really enjoyed your book. Very well written, very interesting. And of course, I have a soft spot for birds myself, having spent several years researching birds in the United States here. I wanted to ask you, one of the things that I noticed was that you spent a lot of time in the Falkland Islands, and I have to ask, as someone who travels a lot for work, what are the logistics of getting to a place like the Falkland Islands and setting up a place to live and doing research and gathering material? It must be very interesting.
Well, I've been lucky enough to go down there several times since 1997. And the first time I was there, I really just turned up. There was a flight from Chile that goes once a week from Punta Arenas, which is all the way down at the bottom of South America in Chilean Tierra del Fuego. And it's a short flight. It's only about an hour and a half. But when you land in the Falklands, you land at the military base, and you're very aware instantly that you've entered a very different cultural space. Even though when you look out the window and it's the same upland geese that you saw in Patagonia, but it's a completely different human world. Right now, I think actually all travel from mainland South America has been suspended. And so the only way to get there is to go from a military base in the UK on a flight that I think makes one stop in Ascension Island to get there. So it's a pretty involved and intense trip. Partly for political reasons, but also just it's very far from just about everywhere else on Earth. And what I came to realize when I first went there was that it's a very special place, not just for the pretty isolated human community that lives there today, which is resolutely British. And they drive on the left, and all the mile marker, the signs are in miles, and there are red phone boxes by the shore in Stanley. But the animal community, the wildlife there is extraordinary. And it's an archipelago of almost 800 islands. There's only 2 really big ones, but all these little scraps of land around the periphery preserve, in some places, an ecosystem that's very little changed in 12,000 years, maybe more. So there are parts of it that are some of the wildest places on Earth. And when I turned up there in 1997 at the age of 21, I had no idea of any of this. It just seemed like a faraway place to go. And that was what my project was to go places where people were kind of isolated in what I thought was the wilderness. And
you discovered a bird there called the
Striated Caracara. Yeah, I had some idea that you could see penguins there, and that sounded exotic to me. So I went to a place where you could see them. But I also met there these weird they seemed like very crowy hawks or something. The black birds of prey or blackish brown birds of prey that like to run around on the ground, that were very social and incredibly curious. They'd come up and look at you as if they have every bit as much right to be there as you, and they wonder if you might be useful in some way. And if you sit still for long enough, they'll start trying to go through your bag, or there are stories of them flying off of people's cameras and things like that. And Darwin actually had this very experience, as I learned later. Back in 97, I was lucky enough then to meet a British ornithologist named Robin Woods in Stanley, who was about to do the very first survey of these birds on the outer islands of the Falklands, which had never been done. And so I pestered him until he took me along, and he took me to these outermost islands. And that was where I saw this world of birds and seals and whales. And I didn't know that the world could be like that.
And are these, is the wildlife there fairly, like these birds, is it fairly habituated to humans, or not afraid of humans because they never see them? Or
the latter. That's really the interesting part, is that, let me actually, can I share my screen with you here?
Sure, please do.
I have let's see. I think the only contemporary image of a drawing of Darwin aboard the Beagle, which was sold at auction a couple of years ago. And you can't read the captions in this image here, but this is Darwin here in the middle with the top hat on, talking to Captain Fitzroy. And you can see these people are all bringing him various different items, probably because he's going to pay for them. I hadn't really appreciated until I started reading about Darwin how much he was basically a kid at that time. He was 22 when the Beagle left England, and kind of a rich kid. I mean, he was there as an official friend to Captain Fitzroy, essentially, because Fitzroy was afraid that if he went without a companion he could talk to who wasn't a member of his crew, that he might suffer the fate of the first captain of the Beagle who committed suicide in Tierra del Fuego. And so Darwin wasn't his first choice either. He kind of bugged Fitzroy until he let him go along when he found out that the position was open, because Fitzroy's friends didn't want to go. So Darwin decided, Darwin had an assured future as a country priest ahead of him. He wasn't, he didn't think he was going to have some career as anything, as a naturalist. That wasn't the career that was available. But he decided he was going to take advantage of this opportunity. And so here in this image, you can see, there's a little bit closer on him. You can see this pile of all these things that are being brought to him. It says Tusk 2003 BC and some skulls and fish. And this guy over here on the right is saying, the least I can get for these here is a tot, meaning some rum for the seashells he's got in his hat. And over on the other side, there's a guy who's saying, I've killed a fine specimen of a flying monkey, shot 3 specimens of geese, and was very near being yaffled by a damn big bear. And he's got, sure enough, right there in his hand, what seems to be in the drawing a flying monkey. You can see its whiskers and wings, and this little dog's interested in it there. What's funny is that even though this drawing was actually made before Darwin reached the Falklands, in the Falklands he would meet an animal that some sealers and whalers called flying monkeys, and it was these striated caracaras. Now, just to remind everyone where the Falklands are, here they are down off the coast of Patagonia. Very, very lonely looking down there.
They call them flying devils as well. And
flying devils, yeah, the sealers and whalers who were in the, some of the first people to turn up in the islands. And this actually, to your earlier point, Darwin was fascinated that the animals that he met in the Falklands were very tame, in the sense of that they didn't run from him immediately. They wouldn't fly away. They would approach him or act like he wasn't important. Even, birds like snipe, which, you're lucky if you can get within hundreds of feet of a snipe in most of the world where they live. You can walk right up to them in the Falklands and they just kind of look at you. And here on places like the Jason Islands here, Steeple and Grand Jason, far off in the northwest corner, like this is a picture I took with my phone. That's my shadow in the foreground there. And these penguins are just walking right around me. And there's a striated caracara coming in from above to check them out. And this is a striated caracara, an adult bird. And you can see the sort of, it almost looks like somebody took a raven and kind of decided to paint it up a little bit.
And what made you choose this bird to write a book about?
Well, I felt like they chose me in a funny way. When I met them that day, it was so uncanny. They just stared at me as if, I have a picture here. Yeah, like this. It was like they demanded an explanation or something, and it just stuck with me. And going around seeing where they were breeding on those islands was such an extraordinary experience that I wondered, what are these things? What are they doing here? And Darwin had wondered the same thing. He'd seen them taking hats and compasses away from the crew of the Beagle and flying off with them. And he wondered, he said, doubtless this bird has for some good reason chosen these islands for their metropolis, because so far as he knew, they were only in the outer Falkland Islands, and then a few of them scattered on islands off Tierra del Fuego, like Cape Horn. And this was just sort of a mysterious thing. Why were these animals only here? Why did they act like this? And why were there so few of them? And that's sort of the MacGuffin of my book, is that just innocently probing that question, starting 25 years ago, gradually started to open this larger and larger and larger story up to me about why the world is the way it is, why the animals of South America are so extraordinary, what it really meant for Darwin to encounter these birds there. And part of what it meant was that in the Falklands, he had stumbled into just about the only place in the entire New World that Europeans actually discovered in any meaningful sense. And the animals there did not have experience with humans. And so this is sort of, it's almost like a door opens into the dream time in a place like this, where you realize that animals did not always run away from human beings. It's something they learned to do. And it leads you towards thinking about, well, that, for the first humans The traveling people who became Amerindians, who came over the Bering Strait, when they walked into North America, they encountered an entire continent filled with animals that had never seen them, who probably regarded them about like this. And then the same again in South America, where they met an entirely different world of animals who were, for a different reason. And just that experience is now receded receded from us by thousands of years, except in places like this, where you can still see it and you can still sense it. And these birds are emblematic of that.
You say there that, or in your book, you say, from their point of view, every object demands immediate investigation.
Yes.
So everything you have, they come up and stand just inches away looking at it.
Some of them do. Not the older birds tend to be a little more standoffish, having had more experience in life, but they take an unusually long time actually to reach maturity. It takes them 5 full years to get their final adult plumage and learn to be a striated caracara, or as they're still known in the Falklands, they call them Johnny Rooks, which is sort of a nice, it's an easier to say name, and it also conveys something of their personality. I mean, this is a woman named Lorraine McGill on an island called Carcass Island in the Falklands, and she's got this group of striated caracaras here who occasionally she throws kitchen scraps to at her back door, and they know where their bread's buttered, and they just sort of hang out patiently waiting.
You also say that their curiosity is stronger than their instinct for self-preservation.
Yes, unfortunately for them, once the Falklands became, when Darwin turned up, sheep farming hadn't really started in the Falklands, but it did shortly thereafter. And sheep farmers came into conflict with these birds, both for imagined and probably real reasons. They'll definitely, if you allow your sheep to lamb in the field, they will come up and they'll take a new lamb or a foundered sheep or a cast sheep, and so the government, following a downturn in the price of wool, actually instituted a bounty on the birds, and they were nearly wiped out of the islands entirely, except for on some of the outermost edges that weren't farmed or were barely farmed. And that's so basically the existence of all those little islands is, I think, how they survived essentially. Today they're protected, and there's sort of I feel like a growing appreciation for them there. I mean, in some ways, I can't think of a better emblem for Falkland Islanders than this scrappy creature who is really good at making the best of whatever is available to it. Because the thing is that what they prey on during the summer months, the austral summer, is these albatross and seabird colonies. Albatrosses, petrels, penguins, and all their resources of chicks and eggs, because there will be thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands even of birds on these islands. But in the winter, here's a striated caracara standing on a black-browed albatross nest. And every one of these sort of tire-shaped structures you can see in this image was constructed by a black-browed albatross. But in the winter, all these seabirds are gone. They can drink salt water, they feed at sea, they have no need of land whatsoever. But the caracaras have to stay there. And on an island like Steeple Jason, which has about 300 caracaras on it, but it's still small enough that you can walk around it in about a day and a half, they've got to find something else to eat during that time. And so you'll see groups of them scavenging on the carcasses of sea lions, or digging for worms and grubs in the turf, or fly larvae in mats of rotting kelp, cleaning the nostrils of elephant seals, eating limpets. I mean, they'll eat anything, and you can see why this tendency to approach anything they haven't seen before has an adaptive value, because that's how you're going to learn that's how you're going to be able to survive through this lean time.
Do they hunt from the air?
Sometimes, but not like, say, another falcon would. I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but these birds, even though they look like hawks or crows, are actually falcons. But they're very different from the falcons that we normally think of up here in the northern world, where you think of like a peregrine falcon or a kestrel or a merlin, these very keen, sharp-eyed bird hunters. These, although they're falcons, have a very different approach to the world. And so they don't do as much. They don't seem. I mean, they will. I've seen them, hunting for penguin chicks, and they'll dive from the air and catch things in their talons. But that's not their only mode of looking for food. And they're especially good at finding things that other striated caracaras are eating. So they follow each other really, really closely. And they'll even call each other in if there's a resource that they identify that they're having trouble getting to, either because it's being protected by territorial birds or some other reason. So it's much more like a crow or a raven, something like that. And the fact is that in South America, there are no crows. There are no ravens. There are a few jays in the tropics, which are related to crows, but there are no big black scavenging omnivores in the continent. And so it's almost as if instead you have these. You have 10 different species of falcon that are sort of like you built a crow on a falcon chassis.
Hmm.
And they've adapted to all the different landscapes of South America in various different ways that are fascinating and always have this element of sort of curiosity and intelligence to it. Although the ones that live on the mainland have had more experience with human beings than these do.
So you said that the striated caracara, their stronghold is in the Falkland Islands, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, so far as we know, I mean, there's a lot we don't know about the birds in Tierra del Fuego, just because some of the areas in southwestern Chile on the outskirts of the Chilean fjords and stuff are just so seldom visited. But and they do seem to turn up around isolated seabird colonies and seal colonies out there. But as best we know right now, the majority of them are, in fact, in the Falklands.
But there's other types of caracaras, is that right?
There are. And Darwin, when he met them, knew that. A bird that was familiar to him, this is a captive bird in England that does extraordinary things. It fetches stuffed animals by name and does other incredible feats of mental agility that are very unusual for a bird of prey, which I describe in the book. But Darwin knew this bird, which is a crested caracara, southern crested caracara, from seeing it in Patagonia. And there's a pair of them there. And they're very similar in that sort of omnivorous scavenging kind of mode. In the 17th century, a Spanish Jesuit wrote that this all manner of subsistence is known to this bird. It pries into, takes advantage of, and understands everything. There's a group of a couple of crested caracaras on a nest there. Unlike the so-called true falcons like peregrines, caracaras build nests, often pretty big and bulky ones, which is probably an ancestral character. And then this little guy is called a chimango, and it's about the size of a small crow and sort of fills that role throughout southern South America. And it was well known to this guy, William Henry Hudson, who plays a big role in the book, who was born in Argentina about 10 years after Darwin passed through there, grew up in the Pampas, the broad grassland south of Buenos Aires, and then traveled to England after his parents died when he was about 30 years old, and never returned to South America, but ended up making his name as a nature writer in England after many hard years, but often by writing about the wildlife that he knew as a child. And he was the first person, certainly the first European ever to write about caracaras in a positive light. Even Darwin had called them false eagles who ill become so high a rank. They just didn't act. They didn't act right for birds of prey. They didn't act noble. They didn't act according to the stereotype that he had brought with him about what birds of prey are supposed to be. But Hudson said, talking about these little chimangos, which were common on his family's farm, he said, a bird so cosmopolitan in its habits would have a whole volume to itself in England. Being only a poor foreigner, it has had no more than a few unfriendly paragraphs bestowed upon it.
And but you say that the caracara is not seen as a noble bird of prey, yet you write that it's probably the bird that's on the Mexican flag. Is that right?
Yeah, there's some debate about that, but I think the evidence is on the side of the bird on the Mexican flag is a golden eagle, indisputably, but it's based on an Aztec legend about the founding of Tenochtitlan, which became Mexico City. that it was the place where it was supposed to be built was signified to their Nahuatl ancestors by a bird perching on a nopal, a prickly pear cactus. And this bird, it depends on how you translate the word coatli or istacoatli, but it appears to have most likely been a crested caracara and not an eagle. So in fact, the bird on the Mexican flag may be a crested caracara in disguise. And a Mexican ornithologist, Rafael Martín del Campo, argued in the 1960s that he thought that the Spanish had sort of substituted the Mexican eagle because it was already an emblem of Habsburg Spain. And so it was, it was a convenient symbol for them. But even it's interesting, there's sort of a sense, even today, like in Texas, people still call them Mexican eagles. And they're known in Mexico, they're often just known as águila, which is eagle, which kind of turns the substitution on its head.
So the stronghold for the striated caracara, there's three types of caracaras, is that right?
No, there's 10.
Oh.
I'll get to some more of them here. The cresteds are found throughout South America, southern and northern, and in fact, that species comes up as far north, as I just mentioned, as Texas, and Florida. Actually, there's a population of them here. But throughout the rest of the continent, in every environment you can find, there's at least one species of caracara, even in places like this. This is the Altiplano, that sort of high central plateau of the Andes that's at the border between Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina. And it's the highest and largest plateau outside of Tibet. It's a desert, but it's fed by these volcanoes like this one, the Pili in the background there, which are 18, 19, 20,000 feet high. And there's snow on their summits, and the snow, as it melts, creates these alkaline lakes and small rivers that course through this desert and create these little oases. And these are frequented by caracaras. This one's a bit further north. This is a carunculated caracara from Ecuador and Colombia, which is in the sort of alpine moorland up there. And they're valued there culturally as sort of bringers of good luck, good fortune, and a good harvest. And this is a person dressed as a carunculated caracara, sort of symbolic one in a solstice parade called Inti Raymi, which happens every year. And this bird, which is just to the south of it and is very similar, it's called a mountain caracara. This one's standing on the ruins of Machu Picchu. And the Inca actually used the feathers of these birds in the ceremonial headdress of the Inca emperor. This is Huascar, one of the last Inca emperors, and he's wearing mountain caracara feathers on his the mascapaicha, which is the name of the crown that he wore. So they had a special significance and retain it to some degree for people living in the high Andes. This one has come just last year, actually, started coming to a high rise in La Paz in Bolivia, where there was an apartment where people started to feed it. And it ended up bringing 2 more mountain caracaras, and they set up a nest and started breeding there on the ledge of this apartment building, which it kind of points up a feature of caracaras in general. They're very good at forming partnerships, not just with humans, but with other animals. They follow pumas, they follow jaguars. There's one, this is getting ahead of things a little bit, but here's a young yellow-headed caracara. They get the yellow head later in life. This is a young bird. But this tapir, which is on right here, which is one of those strange sort of donkey pig looking creatures that you may remember from the beginning of 2001 that's hanging out with the 8 people in the beginning of that. But tapirs, when they encounter yellow-headed or black caracaras, which are 2 tropical species, will actually roll over on their backs like a dog and let them pick off their ectoparasites, things like ticks, nice, yummy, blood-filled little morsels there. And it's an interesting little partnership, but it's so enduring that, one of the Wapishana Amerindian words for terms for black caracara is tapir bird.
And are all of the caracaras as disarmingly open and friendly as the striated caracara?
Well, they've all had more experience with human beings than the striateds have. but they can be strangely confiding. There's one tropical species that I go to visit in the book is probably the weirdest of all the caracaras, and they're called red-throated caracaras, and they eat almost nothing but wasps' nests and fruit, which may make them the weirdest raptor in the world. I mean, they've given up chasing after things that run away from them. And in the book, we go to find them in Guyana. Go back to the big view here so you can see this. Oops. There we go. Guyana is in northeastern South America, and the three countries of the Guyana Shield, Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana, are kind of sandwiched between Venezuela and Brazil. And it's a region that doesn't get talked about very much, partly because it's not part of, culturally part of Latin America. These were small colonies, basically, of Britain, Holland, and France, respectively. French Guiana is still part of France. They use the euro. You can cross a remote range of mountains in northern Brazil and end up in the Eurozone. Suriname was given independence in I think the 60s, and Guyana in 1956. But the official language in Guyana is still English. And these countries have huge stretches of intact tropical forest in them with very few roads that are difficult of access, and probably the wildest part of all of South America in some ways. And to find red-throated caracaras, which live in primary tropical forests, I went to this river in southern Guyana called the Riwa in the company of these three awesome men, Josie George here, Rambo Roberts, and Brian Duncan. And they speak English because this is an official language of the country, and it's one of the languages they were brought up with, which made it's just really extraordinary to be able to meet Amerindian people who speak English in South America. It's really, really rare. There's Josie with one of the fish in the Riwa River, which is just packed full of fish, but this one's called a vampire fish. You can see why. There's also evidence along the Riwa of people living in this place for a very, very long time. The Guyana Shield may have been one of the very first places that people occupied when they first came down from North America. And these marks like these are where people would have sharpened stone adzes and things. I have no idea of knowing how old these carvings are, but they could be thousands of years old. And this is the other person who was with us on this trip. And I'm sorry, I should have given you a trigger warning if you're an arachnophobe, because that's not costume jewelry. That really is the world's largest spider on Sean's head. But as you can tell by his expression, he's not at all disturbed by this. He was really excited to have this thing hanging out with him. But Sean studies red-throated caracaras, and he pursued one of the craziest PhDs I've ever heard of, because it was founded on the idea that he was going to try to figure out, Sean's an entomologist and a chemical ecologist, and he was going to figure out whether red-throated caracaras really do secrete a wasp repellent, because there are several observations of them attacking wasp nests, and that the wasps would not land on them when they did this, which just seems to defy all logic. And anybody who's had to battle an infestation of paper wasps or around your house, that if you attack a wasp nest, they're not pleased about it.
Right.
And yet this is what these birds do. So Sean went to French Guiana to study this, and did just an incredible research project, and figured out what they were in fact doing, which is more fantastic even than that. I'm going to leave it for the book to tell you the whole story of what Sean did and how he figured it out. But his research involved like a crossbow and a guitar amp and a bee suit, and just became one of the funniest and strangest research projects I've ever heard of. This is a red-throated caracara in his hands there. And you can see this is just an amazing looking animal. It looks sort of like a Muppet. It's got, this bright red face and throat, these bright red eyes. And they live in family groups of sometimes as many as 11 birds. Sean found the first nests ever described of this species, and they were nesting in giant bromeliads. Here's two of them performing a territorial display, because they're almost like a troop of monkeys. They hang out in a group, they travel around patrolling this territory and yelling and screaming and sort of dancing at anything that they think of as an intruder, and chowing down on wasps' nests. You can sort of, and you can see a little bit in this. I mean, they have this caracara expression that all of the caracaras are like this. They all have, you just get the sense they're looking into things a little more carefully than most birds do. But here is the interior of a nest of red-throated caracaras. This is a young red-throated caracara taking its first look at a human being ever. And this nest is 200 feet up in a tree inside a bromelia that the adults have kind of cleared out. They've torn up the middle of it to make this platform. And they have just one chick at a time. And they bring it every 15 minutes, wasp combs filled with larvae. And you can see some of them right here, but you can also see down here, there's a millipede. And Sean put a nest camera in this nest to see what what their home lives was like, and found that the adults were bringing an awful lot of millipedes, which is especially strange because the chicks didn't eat them. The adults would sort of hold them up to the chick, and then they would bite the head of the millipede and drop it into the bottom of the nest. And he hasn't gotten the evidence it would be required to actually prove this, but his suspicion is that they're actually using this as a kind of a pest repellent, because millipedes, they're sort of the main thing they have going for them is they taste really bad. They've been around for almost 400 million years. And they have these so-called repugnatory glands that ooze this sort of sticky, horrible, nasty smelling stuff, which anybody who's ever handled one finds out about pretty quickly. And there are monkeys, capuchin monkeys, and actually even in Madagascar, lemurs that will anoint themselves with millipedes. They'll pick them up and kind of mess with them a little bit and then rub them all over their bodies. And the lemurs actually seem to get kind of high off of this. They kind of wig out and fall asleep. But the thinking is that they may be using this as a sort of a bug repellent. And there are an awful lot of things that want to infest a young chick in the nest in the tropics. And so it may be that these birds are actually using a kind of chemical technology to protect their nests.
Chemical ecologist, so he's studying the chemistry of how these birds can negate the effects of wasps and how they might use the smell. Is that the kind of thing a chemical ecologist looks at?
Yeah, I mean, everyone understands chemical ecology on a fundamental level because your nose is a chemical detector. Our noses aren't that good compared to most animals. Birds have for a long time were thought not to have a sense of smell at all. Now it seems that they pretty much all do. Some of them are much better than others. But yeah, this was sort of the question was like, since wasps use chemicals to coordinate, social wasps use use chemical cues to coordinate their behavior, could the birds somehow be using this against them in some way? Because wasps belong to the huge order of insects called hymenopterans, which includes ants, bees, wasps, and I think sawflies, that has all kinds of different kinds of, they have every kind of society you could imagine just about, from purely solitary all the way up to these just massive nests of ants, and that have, so been famously revealed to practice things like agriculture and warfare, and nobody's found art or philosophy, but I mean, would we know that when we saw it, looking for it? So Sean's first love really was the wasps. And the social wasps practice the thing called absconding, where, they'll send one chemical defense one chemical signal if the nest is under attack, and they'll go out and start attacking whatever it is that's attacking the nest. But there's also another signal for when the nest is no longer defensible, and they decide, okay, we're giving up. And when that alarm sounds, they flee the nest, leave their brood behind, gather somewhere else, send out scouts to find a new location for a nest. The scouts confer. When they've agreed on a location, they come back to the nest, and then they lead their mothers and their sisters on a chemical trail to a new home and start building their city all over again.
Yeah.
That's an example of the kind of thing that chemical ecologists study.
I have to ask a quick question. Is that world's largest spider? Is that venomous?
Venomous, yes, but not especially so. Supposedly, the bites from them are not especially, are painful, but not deadly. That spider, to go back to it for a second, it's a Goliath bird-eating spider, It's a specialty of the Guyana Shield, and they mostly live very boring lives, especially the females, because they just sit in a burrow and wait for something to come by and then jump out, grab it, and go back in. The males, which this is one of, have more exciting lives, and they tend to be shorter because they have to roam around looking for females who, after they mate, will often eat them. So they have no choice but to wander around a little bit. And this one was near our campsite, and Sean was very excited to see it. And so
You say it's a bird-eating spider?
that's its name. It's not, they very, very rarely eat birds. It's not impossible, but they're much more likely to eat worms or possibly like small rodents running right across the edge of their burrow. But they mostly eat, or cockroaches especially.
Now, you say in your book that this is the most intelligent bird in the world. The caracara. I don't know about the red-throated caracara, but you talk about the striated caracara is the most intelligent bird in the world, which is the focus of your book.
Yeah.
You would get some pushback from other bird experts on that, I would think.
Certainly.
So I wonder what you think makes them the smartest bird in the world, as opposed to, ravens, crows, the Caledonian crow, which is considered by many to be the smartest bird. What is it about these that makes you make that claim?
Well, I wouldn't say, for one thing, the very idea of talking about intelligence in this way is like, this bird's the smartest is silly. Generally, when we're intelligence, we're talking about, is it like us or not? Because, I mean, seen from the right angle, a tree has an intelligence. I mean, is it well adapted to its habitat? Does it do things does it do complex things that make its life better, that make it more likely to reproduce? And in a way, one of the things that the book talks about is that caracaras, as falcons, belong to a misunderstood family, because falcons, as it turns out, are not closely related to other birds of prey. They're more closely related to parrots. And the argument I make in the book is that probably the parrot-falcon ancestor lived in Antarctica, because Antarctica was not always cold like it is now. I mean, birds are the dinosaurs that lived. Every bird you see is a descendant of a dinosaur that survived the Cretaceous extinction. Where they survived the Cretaceous extinctions is a matter of debate, but it appears that the southern hemisphere did not suffer as much from the effects of the Cretaceous extinction, from the effects of the asteroid that caused the Great Cretaceous extinctions 66 million years ago, as the northern world did, where most of the land is. But at the bottom of the world, the continent of Antarctica was lush and green at that time. There were no ice caps. There was a lot of volcanism down there then. It was cooler, but it was not cold. It was temperate. And it may be that Antarctica, in ways that I think we may yet discover in more detail as the ice keeps coming off of it, kind of saved a lot of the animal world. And the ancestor of parrots and falcons, I think, probably lived there. The ancestral parrots seem to have gone up into Australasia, ancestral falcons into South America, and then parrots crossed back across Antarctica and into South America again later. But the closest relative on the parrot side to a striated caracara, for instance, is a kea. Have you ever encountered a kea?
In New Zealand?
Yeah.
I know of them. I've never been to New Zealand, so I haven't.
They're very weirdly crowy parrots. They like to eat meat. They're very smart. They like puzzles. They like to solve multi-step problems. They hang out in family groups. They do a lot of the same things that these striated caracaras do. And what I wonder about, and I don't know the answer to this, is whether this type of mind, this very flexible, generalist, open mind about how you should live, what you should eat, this kind of thing, is an ancestral characteristic, and that the falcons we call true falcons, peregrines, etc., which are a later diverging lineage than the caracaras, actually sort of gave up this version of their minds when they went north and became these peerless hunters. We tend to think of human-like intelligence as a thing that you would never lose. Like, why would you get rid of that? But if it weren't helpful for you, you might.
You also say that, is it the striated caracara that's moving into the United States now, moving further north?
No, that's the crested caracaras, the ones I showed you earlier with the orange face and the sort of looks like they're wearing a toupee. They were present here during the Pleistocene, when, you know, the age of mastodons and saber-toothed cats and camels and all these things in North America. And they were part of a big assemblage of scavenging birds because there was, like, sort of like parts of East Africa today, there was so much meat on the hoof just running around. And so there were a lot of dead animals, and scavengers, there was room for a lot of scavengers to make a living. After the extinction of the Pleistocene, what's called the Pleistocene megafauna, all these big animals that disappear, probably not coincidentally around the same time that humans appear in North America. The caracaras disappear from most of North America, except for this little population in Florida, which seems to be an Ice Age relic. But their range retreats southward. Now they're moving back northward again, however. I mean, they've been seen, let's see. This is an extinct caracara, by the way. It's lived on the island of Guadalupe off Baja California. That I talk about it in the book. I won't get into that right now. But it's the only species of the only bird of prey ever known to have been wiped out by human beings specifically. But right here, this crested caracara, it's a northern crested caracara. This is a wild bird. It's 45 miles east of Seattle in Skykomish, Washington. They've been seen in Montana. They've been seen in New York State. The first one ever sighted turned up about 4 years ago. They've been seen in Alberta, in British Columbia. One of them stayed in Nova Scotia for a couple of years. They seem to be reoccupying North America to some degree. And the question would be why? You know, is this, if it's just climate change, you know, if it's just warming, well, the world that doesn't make sense because the world used to be colder. It seems, and they were here. But what I wonder is if they're coming north in the company of an old friend, which is these black vultures, whose range is also expanding in North America. And the thing is, there's a new predator in North America that rivals anything the Pleistocene had to produce, you know, saber-toothed cats, whatever. It's cars. Every year, cars on the roads of North America kill more deer than the wildebeest population of the Serengeti. And that's just deer. I'm not thinking about coyotes and raccoons and cats and dogs and possums and everything that is dead by the side of the road on the highway every morning. And these are very intelligent birds. They figured this out. And I think that these caracaras like to hang out with vultures. They've been photographed multiple times preening one another like this. I think they may be following them back into the continent that they left for a little while. Or I shouldn't say continent, it's really the US and Canada. They were present in Mexico, which is part of North America.
So it's they're not a bird that needs temperate or needs warmer climate. They can survive in a winter climate, or do they migrate?
That's unclear, but when you think about the southern crested caracara, which is scarcely distinguishable from this one, they're all the way down there in Tierra del Fuego. They're in the Falklands. They're in places that are very cold a lot of the year. That doesn't seem to deter them.
And how big are these caracaras?
Not quite eagle-sized, but it would sort of be a little bigger than a large raven or like a red-tailed hawk in size. Pretty big, but differently proportioned. You can see these long legs that they've got, and they actually have a muscle in their legs that the true falcons lost that makes it very easy for them to walk and run around on the ground. Darwin compared them to pheasants in that way. And they like to do that. They like to walk around on the ground. They seem just as at ease in the ground as they are in the air.
Well, one of those would certainly stand out in Montana if we ever saw one here.
They have turned up in Montana. I can find the record for you somewhere, but people who see them often, even here, and it's interesting, even in Florida, there are birding lists where I see, you know, somebody will post a picture of one and say, "What is this?" For some reason, they just have lingered. They've been kind of shoved out of the front of people's minds as something that they might see. And I think they're going to be more and more visible and more common as the years go by.
Now I wonder, I thought we had some we were going to open to questions here.
Yeah.
Now I'm back because now I remember to unmute myself. That was great. I have to say, I rarely have listened to a conversation like this and thought so often, wow, I never heard that before. So that was really great. And that you mentioned Skycomish practically up the road from me, and who knew these were in our backyards? This is wonderful. We do have questions from the audience, which I can bring to you here. Let me grab the first one. The first one goes back to one of the photos from early on where someone asked, what is on the bird's chest? I think on photos, it looks like he's wearing a medallion.
That's the bird's crop, which is it's an adaptation you see in many scavenging birds, including vultures, that they've got this very easily distendable crop that allows them to just shove down a whole bunch of food really fast and then go somewhere else to digest it in peace. And when you're among a bunch of different birds at a carcass or something like that, you kind of want to be able to cram your face and then go and do some digesting of it later. But in striated caracaras in particular, and also in crested and other caracaras, this crop is also brightly colored, like the color of their facial skin. And why that is not known for certain. But the guess is that it's kind of got a social signaling function a little bit, in the sense that a bird that's got a really big, bright yellow crop is doing pretty well. And if you were, maybe if you're advertising for a mate, that might help you. In the younger birds, it's certainly helpful in that you can't conceal good fortune. So it tells you what bird to learn from in a way.
Interesting. I think this got answered a bit. How many caracaras are there in South America, and can you find them elsewhere? I think you said there were 10 different species of caracaras across South America.
Yeah,
and so, but no other parts of the world, just in the Americas, right?
Really, it's a South American group. There's that one group that's starting to come north, but the reason for that is because South America was so isolated for so long. South America and North America, and I'd never thought about this until I started working on this book, were actually separate from one another for 100 million years. And after the connection between Antarctica and South America broke through, which was about 30 million years ago. So, okay, the big Cretaceous extinctions happen. Another 30 million years goes by before that connection is broken. But when it does, it creates the South Polar Vortex, which is this ocean current that circles Antarctica and keeps out the warmer water from the north, and Antarctica starts to cool down and starts to freeze. South America then, for the next 30 million years, is isolated. And its animals, plants, everything that lives on it pursues its own path, kind of like Australia is today. And it doesn't connect with North America until between 3 and 5 million years ago, which is a short time, geologically speaking. And when this happens, animals from the northern world and this isolated southern continent that's been almost a planet unto itself suddenly encounter each other for the first time, which one paleontologist called one of the most extraordinary events in the whole history of life. Now, some animals went north, some went south. We have 3 South American animals in North America today: porcupines, armadillos, and possums. If you ever wondered why we had one marsupial, that's why. And it's because marsupials are actually from South America. They went over to Australia via Antarctica after the Cretaceous extinctions and radiated there. But marsupial, the hearth of marsupials that survived the Cretaceous extinctions is in South America. North American animals also went south. And in fact, most of the large mammals that you think of that live in South America today are descended from North American animals who went south at this time. Big cats, jaguars, pumas, even those weird tapirs, which died out in North America but survived in South America. Camels in the form of guanacos and vicuñas, which are the wild ancestors still living of llamas and alpacas. This has sort of led to a narrative of this event that somehow the northern animals were kind of superior to the ones in the south. But it's really not true at different scales in the mammalian world, and in the bird world, it's definitely not true. All the groups like flycatchers have a South American origin. Many woodpeckers think the birds were fabulously successful in this interchange. And one of the lessons of the book is that this interchange is still going on. Its terms are still being negotiated. And the caracaras survived through all of this, but they're a relic of that isolation that South America experienced. And it's part of, it's probably why the crows never reached it.
Interesting. Here's another one, which is prefaced with hard question. Should interested people travel to South America and the Falklands, or will that hurt more than help?
Hurt what?
Well, you said, I think that the caracaras there are now protected, but there are not very many of the striated caracaras in the world at all, are there?
The estimate is somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000, which puts them not far above giant pandas as mature individuals. I mean, the larger question of whether you should travel long distances at all, if you're talking about carbon footprint and that kind of thing, is a valid question that's probably outside the bounds of what we can discuss right here. As far as whether it would cause direct harm to striated caracaras to visit them, I would say probably not. There are very few places you can actually go and easily, in scare quotes, see them, like Carcass Island, where you saw Lorraine McGill. That it's not going to harm the birds directly for you to visit them there. And the other caracaras are quite easy to see throughout South America. In fact, part of the, with the exception of those red throats, which are trickier, part of the problem is that they're so common in many places that they're overlooked. They're not regarded as something that would be anything special to see, in the same way that anything that you see in your own backyard for your entire life doesn't seem especially remarkable.
We definitely have time for a couple more questions here, at least. This was so interesting, I forgot to mention something I should have said earlier when I first showed up, which was to thank everyone again who, when registering, did purchase one of your books or one of Jim's books, which you could do right when you register. If you didn't do that, you can still, of course, visit the website of whatever your favorite local bookshop is that has helped bring this to you. It's a great way to support what these authors are doing and what your bookstores are doing. Oh, yes, there's the book right now. So we'll try to drop those links into the chat too. So just a reminder that we really do appreciate your support in that area. Question sort of backing up bigger picture from the audience here. I mean, you've talked with such passion about birds. It sounds like you've maybe spent your whole life thinking about this, but I'm not sure that's the case. Did you ever think, oh, I'm going to write a book about a bird?
No.
And if you're going to write another book, what might that be about?
Oh, God. Okay. Well, the first question, the answer is no, I didn't think I would write a book about a bird. But this bird kind of just got hold of me 25 years ago, and it trying to answer this question, what are these and what are they doing here, was what led me on this long journey. And it just kept opening. And I kept seeing places where there was very little known, or the things that were known weren't connected with other things that were known. It left me feeling that this is a big, flashy animal. I mean, the entire group is these big, flashy birds of prey. They're not particularly obscure. They're easy to, they stand out when you see them. And if this little is known about a group like this, what else must we not know about? And scientists who study the natural world now live in as exciting a time as the 19th century in terms of discoveries about the animal world, about groups of organisms that we rarely think about. But it's very hard to convey that information to people because it's very easy to be fooled into thinking that the internet contains all knowledge, or that, as William Henry Hudson said, the curse of books, the delusion that they contain all knowledge that is no longer necessary to think or investigate for ourselves. And there's a great deal left to learn about this world. And that sense of humility that I came away from this with is something that, and wonder is the thing I'd most like readers to take away. But the second question, is there another book? I hope it doesn't take 25 years to do another book, because in that case, I only got one more to go. But I have one in mind a little bit, but I mean, Jim, as you know, a book is no thing to be undertaken lightly. And
right. Jonathan, I want to follow up on something you said there I think is really important. And that is that here we are, the planet is being disassembled by people, loss of biodiversity, climate change. And the true irony about all this, and I get into this in The Wonder of Birds, is that how little we really know about this planet that we live on. Elon Musk is talking about going to Mars, and people are talking about all these fantastic things, but the wonder is that it needs to be stoked in order for us to really respond to this world appropriately. We take it for granted, but it is beyond belief really what's out there, and how little we've just scratched the surface about whether it's birds or any other form of life. I think that's a key point in what you're talking about, and key to protecting what we have.
And this, that, I mean, birds are a very well studied group compared to most animals, and that so little is known even about them ought to be a red flag. But I think there's a perception that there are all these scientists out there studying the living world all the time. There really aren't. Most scientists are preoccupied with materials, pharmaceuticals, weapons, things that make people money. And things that don't make people money are very difficult to fund for most research scientists. And trying to appreciate the diversity of life on Earth has very little appreciable economic value in the near term for most funders. And so there's the bad side of that is we don't know as much as we should. The good side of it is there's an awful lot of opportunity.
One last question, I think. A little bit of a change of topic there. Again, backing up bigger picture. You have a whole nother career as a musician.
Yeah.
How does that relate, if it does at all, to your work as a writer? Or do these topics feed into your music at all? Completely different? How does that work?
Well, music's more fun because it's more immediate, and it just trips emotional circuits in your brain right and left, whether you're rehearsing, whether you're writing, whether you're performing. Writing comes with far fewer goodies in any immediate sense. I never had a single day when I was working on this book that I thought, oh man, I just rocked it today. It was great. It's sort of all coming at once at this moment, but it was a very, very long wait in some ways. And so music's much more engaging in an immediate sense. Also, it has the things I really value about music and about writing are that they give you an opportunity to get, or the researching for the writing, I should say, they give you an opportunity to get outside of your own mind and to stretch what your own mind is and contains, and get out of the sort of echo chamber that you tend to put yourself in instinctively. And so they're both ways of reaching out with your senses beyond what you know, sometimes in a sort of mystical sense, sometimes in just the very concrete running down facts, coming up with questions and trying to find the answers.
Have you written a song about caracaras?
No, I don't know what. Music is so sort of, and lyrics especially in music are so abstract in the way that they come, because they to me, a good lyric is mated with the music in a way that it's kind of inseparable from it. I know songwriters who write out the words first and then put the music to it later, but I've never been able to do it. So if a caracara somehow turned up in a song of mine in an organic way, I'd be happy to see it, but I don't know that that'll ever happen.
We'll find out. Well, I think we'll have to leave it here. We could stay and do this for hours, but I know everybody else has other things to do. So we will let you go. I'd like to say thanks to both of you, Jim and Jonathan, for doing this really fascinating conversation. Again, thanks to the people who joined us, and tell your friends to check out our other events, and check out the recording of this one on our YouTube channel. You can just look for Books in Common NW on there, and you will find it. And go to your local bookshop and pick up one of these fine books. Good luck with the rest of the book tour, and thanks again, guys.
Well, thank you to everyone. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, James. Thanks, Jess.
Welcome.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.